Good morning. Being 10 a.m., I'll call to order the McHenry County Board special meeting regarding the fiscal year 2023 budget review. Kathy, could you call the roll, please?
Michelle Aving. Carlos Acosta. Pamela Altoff. Kay Bates. Carolyn Campbell. John Collins. Stephen Doherty. Joseph Gottemoller. Tanya Jindrick. John Young. James Kearns. Teresa Meshes. Lori Parrish. Robert Nowak. Carolyn Schofield. Jeffrey Schwartz. Michael Scala.
Present.
Larry Smith. Jeffrey Thorson. Michael Vijuk. Tracy Von Bergen. Kelly Wegner. Thomas Wilbeck. Paula Jensen. Chairman Bueller.
Here. Having a quorum, we'll move forward. I did notice, it was pointed out to me that we don't have the pledge on the agenda today, so I think we should say the pledge, and I'll lead today. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Any public comment, Pete? I didn't see anything on the sheet. No public comment. Do we have any member comments this morning? Mr. Vijay.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me. Two things. One, I hope that the board will consider in their thoughts and reflections of the people who are suffering in Florida and probably up along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean due to Hurricane Ivan. I hope that no losses and that the government of not only the states but federal government comes to their aid as quickly as possible. Second, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to give thanks to Patrick Keneally, the state's attorney's office. A constituent of McHenry County contacted me on a confidential issue. Given that the topic was of such a high degree, I forward that information to Mr. Keneally, and he assured me that he would get back to the constituent within an hour of our conversation, and I greatly want to thank Mr. Keneally for his assistance in that matter. While I don't know the result of it, nor do I want to know it because it's a confidential matter, I still think that Mr. Keneally stepped up very quickly to help us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay. Any others? Seeing none. Just briefly, I want to thank Administrator Peter Austin, Finance Director Kevin Bueso, Finance Committee Chair Mike Scala for meeting with us multiple times over the last few months. Early on, we recognized that there would be significant challenges for this coming year's budget, and I think that we've come up with a solution with three or four different scenarios here that you'll see today, and we'll proceed with our presentation. Thank you. Oh, actually, we do have a need for executive session at the end of today's meeting, so stick around.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out. So as Chairman said, this budget has some challenges, and I really appreciate the work that all the staff put in, not only the staff here, but the department chairs and elected officials on working to reduce expenses so that we could try and make this a budget that's balanced. And with that, I did bring donuts this morning, and there's a purpose for that. So all of you have to have a donut. Purpose of that is to get on a sugar high. So when we talk about the Safety Act and everything, you're all excited about that. You have a lot of energy for it, and then we get to the budget part. You start going on that roller coaster down, and you can all go to sleep, and then at the end of it, we'll wake you up, and we'll be all done. So that's the objective. Yeah, go ahead.
Kevin, will you advance the slide here? We'll kind of show what we're going to talk about today. And I too want to thank Kevin and Carrie. This is the third time you guys have done a great job in getting us to this point. But I also want to thank all of our offices and departments. Remain really proud of. It's me.
I gave you the jacked up one.
Is this one working now? Okay.
Yeah, see?
Well, I know I say it every year, but all of our offices and departments do such a good job in this budget process, and I just remain so proud of what we do here with our budgets. And it's just the foundation of trust that we have in one another. And it's trust that we know that our offices and departments are going to continue to look for efficiencies and continue to look for opportunities to save money. But they're also going to trust county administration and ultimately the county board that we are going to give them the resources that they need to do their job. So it's that two-way street, and I see it failing in so many counties that there isn't that trust between offices and departments and the county board, and we've got it here, and I want to keep that going. Nothing about this budget has been easy. From the start, we knew this was going to be a challenge. This morning, we want to give you a presentation that shows some scenarios, and that was kind of something that you set as our goal back in May when we developed the budget policy, was to show you some scenarios. So we want to talk about those scenarios and the ramifications of each of those scenarios. And I'd like to leave this meeting this morning, hopefully it's still this morning, but I'd like to leave today with a pretty good idea of the path that we're going to take out to bring this budget across this finish line. A week from today is Finance Committee. I'm hopeful, I'm confident that we'll have a budget that we're going to advance out of Finance onto the County Board for 30-day review on October 18th. But we got a little discussion before we get there. In August, Kevin and I stood here and we talked about the challenges, right? It was kind of a grim picture, and we acknowledged this was a tough one. The combination of some of the things that the state has asked us to accept and the challenges that the state has asked us to meet, coupled with like 40-year inflation, it was like a two-for punch that was just really tough to imagine. And that was our message in August. We came in September, earlier this month, and the picture was a little bit better because our non-property tax revenues are great. I mean, we're really, really doing well in the non-property tax area. And that's closed the gap. And as we presented earlier this month, we kind of have this budget within striking distance now, and that's what we want to talk about today, is how we're going to get us over the finish line. That's kind of my opener. Kevin is going to be the main presenter today. Mike and I are going to provide a little bit of color, but I want to start our discussion again by kind of reminding us about some of our new challenges that we've been asked to accept. And I'm going to ask Patrick to kind of come up and start that discussion, do a couple slides, just reminding us of where we are with some of our new challenges. And Rob and Sandra and Dan, you're all going to help out on that. So, Patrick.
This battery's low in there.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure and a thrill to be in front of this August board. Please forgive me at the outset. I caught a cold from my kids. I'm on very little sleep, so my brain's going at about 50%, which is, even at 100%, I'm still a little slow on the uptake. But I wanted to talk about the SAFETY Act and some of the things that it means. And one of the things that I'm trying to impress upon people is that this constitutes a categorical change with respect to how the criminal justice system operates, and is going to require some significant modifications in the procedures of our office, and it's going to require the expending of more resources than the state's attorney's office has, far more resources than we currently have available to us. So just at the outset and as context, when I took office in 2016, we immediately cut, I believe, 4 full-time positions and have continued to cut with respect to our goods and services purchases to the tune of about 12%. If you extrapolate out from that to where we are today, we've saved the county over $4 million with respect to many of the budget cuts that we've made at the state's attorney's office. So fiscal responsibility has been our guiding principle. It's one of the things that is important to me as an elected official. And so many of the new requests that I'm making, I hope that it's not lost on the county board that these requests have not been made in the past, and these are things that I consider to be mission critical with respect to the state's attorney's office. So we are requesting one new attorney, and the reason for that is because by 2023, going through 2025, all police departments are going to have to get body cameras. So what that means is that when police officers show up on scene, usually there's 2 or 3, even for a misdemeanor event like a domestic battery. A lot of times there's 2 for a DUI. You have not only body cameras, but you also have dash cams. And so so let's say it's an hour-long investigation and there's 5 investigators out there. That's 10 hours of footage that somebody has to review. It's our responsibility to find exculpatory evidence and to turn that over to the defense, especially if it's in our possession. So somebody needs to put eyes on all of those videos. DuPage County, which is about 3 times the size of McHenry County, they requested 60 new employees. Now, I don't know how many they're gonna get. 60 new employees. Now, I don't know how many they're gonna get. You know, ask for 10, expect 5, get 2. So it may be far less than that. But we're requesting 1 new attorney and we're requesting 2 new investigators. The investigators' role will be, in addition to watching the video, they'll also have another role. So how the Safety Act has changed the manner in which court operations are done is that usually when somebody fails to appear or fails to comply with the condition of bond, the judge can issue a bench warrant for their arrest. That has changed. Now, a judge can no longer issue a warrant for their arrest. Rather, they have to issue a summons, and the summons needs to be served by what's called a process server. So just historically speaking, if you look at the number of summonses that are on average served by McHenry County on defendants, it's less than 50%. So every single day in this courthouse, people fail to appear. Every single day in this courthouse, people fail to comply with conditions of bond. There are, if I was going to give a rough estimate, maybe between 10 and 15 bench warrants that are issued out of court calls Monday through Friday, 50 or so a week. That's going to be 50 more summonses that ultimately need to get served, and the return on those summonses isn't always the best. We have investigators in our office when we have priority summonses with respect to witnesses who we need or with respect to dangerous defendants or defendants that we're focused on, to have them put in an extra amount of effort to go out and get those people served and get them back into court. So that, in addition to watching the videos, is the reason why we're requesting 2 new investigators. And then lastly, we're requesting a PR person. So just with respect to comparison, Lake County has 3 people who are on their payroll full-time who do public relations work with respect to the press and with respect to getting the state's attorney's messages out. Kane County has 2, DuPage County has 3, Winnebago County has 1. We don't have anybody. And I think that the criminal justice system and us have done public relations very, very poorly, and there are vested interests out there who have a different tact and who have different ideas than perhaps the county board has, certainly that I have, and especially law enforcement has. And I think one of the most underrepresented voices in the ongoing conversation with regard to how to change the criminal justice system and reform the criminal justice system is that of law enforcement and is that of prosecutors. And I think that as a result of that, we've seen some bad fruit come down the pipe with respect to the Safety Act and some other things that I believe, that I know that this view is shared by many in law enforcement, is going to undermine the safety of places like McHenry County and is going to inhibit our ability to do our job effectively and hold people accountable. So that is the underlying justification for our requests, and I'm happy to field any questions that you may have. Please, Ms. Jensen.
What is the population comparison at Lake County and Kane County to the population that you service in our county?
These are going to be rough estimates, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe Lake County is about twice the size of McHenry County, and I believe that Kane County is also about twice the size. Maybe they have about 600,000 residents to our 300. Okay. Okay.
So it gets it gets back to the question of how many more people they need down in Kane County based on how large the county is and the demand, right?
Yes, of course.
And Lake County as well. So do you think that's a good comparison of what you're saying to us about
The PR?
you need here and what they're doing there?
So I think that if you just broke it down in terms of a fraction,
Right.
so if we're, and I guess you're building in a number of assumptions, but let's say
Right.
that if they have 3 PR people for
Right.
twice the population, then perhaps we would need 1.5, and we're requesting 1.
Okay, and I think, all due respect to you, I think you do a good job as far as letting us know who is, I get these emails from your office about who's being prosecuted and who's guilty and what's happening to them. It gives me an idea of what your office is doing. So you don't think you're doing a good job there as far as promoting what you do?
I don't think it's sufficient. I mean, the PR person in the office is me. And I can assure you that I do not have the time so while we are able to issue sort of press releases just with respect to those people that are being prosecuted, I think it's a much broader discussion. And I especially think that that's true these days where there are a number of ideas and an ongoing rigorous debate and highly contentious debate going on in the state of Illinois and also broadly with respect to what we want our criminal justice system to look like. And I just don't think that reports with respect to who's been prosecuted, found guilty of what or not guilty of
But
that
get
is
those
sufficient.
I get those notifications, so, is there a task force or a committee, in your office to really talk about social media, website, all those other, tools, to, do messaging?
So all of our attorneys have full-time court calls and are trying cases. They do not have time to participate in a task force with respect to messaging outside sort of their own sort of personal interactions with people. I think this really does take, especially with all of the avenues of social media, with all of the outlets that are there, I just don't think we can do justice to really representing the state's attorney's position with respect to a number of different issues without somebody that can help us with PR.
So would you be open to having that discussion within the county to integrate and collaborate with the county as far as messaging from your area to other areas in the county, whether it's transportation or whether it's, to what I'm saying? So there's an overarching consistent way of doing the work. Would you be open to that?
I mean, I guess I'd have to see the specifics of the proposal. I can, and I know that's a very political,
I know.
right? Exactly. That's like the
being an
perfect political answer.
attorney
Hey, I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I know how to
Yeah,
answer these
I know
questions.
how it works, but
I guess let me just say this. So one of the things is that the state's attorney's office deals with a lot of confidential information. I want that to be baked into a lot of our public relations statements. And so the idea of sort of sharing somebody who is embedded in the state's attorney's office who needs to understand what's going on and who may be privy to some of that confidential information and then have them go outside and work in other aspects of the county, that worries me.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Yenser. Mr. Vijay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Patrick, for your presentation. Looking at our budget request spreadsheet that we have here, could you explain to me, on the second line, it says a lead assistant state's attorney versus an assistant state's attorney? Is there, I'm sorry, you don't have a sheet in front of you.
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared to go through all these right now.
No, it's just, I'm just wondering, because the assistant public defender is a $65,000 would change position. And the lead assistant state's attorney, which Mr. Keneally has pointed out, would be somebody I would assume would be going through the paperwork. And so I'm just wondering, does that position have to be a lead assistant?
So we would not want this to be an entry-level attorney, because entry-level attorneys are primarily responsible for handling difficult court calls that have a lot of cases, specifically misdemeanor and traffic. We have what's called a felony review unit, and the job of the people in felony review is to take phone calls from the police officers and assess whether or not their investigation is worthy of a felony offense. They do not have a court call, and by virtue of that, that would be the people who spend a lot of office time where they could be multitasking, watching videos, as well as taking phone calls, as well as preparing for a grand jury. So we'd like to slot this position into the grand jury part of our office, which is a middle position, and so that would justify the salary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Keneally.
I want to just, before we get too far into these discussions, we're focusing today on the general fund. That's above this line. The budget that recommendations that we're going to present today fund every one of these positions. So just, that's the backdrop. We're prepared to provide funding for all. Virtually all these positions are must-dos. We're not in, we've kind of culled out the things that can wait. So, you know, above this line, these are things that we got to do. We're going to be presenting a way to accomplish all these things.
Mr. Collins?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for your presentation today. I really appreciate it. I also thank you for the $4 million you saved. I wasn't aware of that. That's really good. If we can go back one slide, Kevin, please. So the second bullet point there, you talked about that at some length. I'm curious, even though we're changing from a warrant to the, I apologize, what was it called? The rule to show cause. Is it going to be the same number, approximately the same number of people that are going to fall, you know, that had to have a bench warrant issued versus a show to cause? Won't that be the same number of people?
We anticipate more by virtue of the lack of strong disincentives such as a warrant when it comes to failures to appear. So we anticipate more, but I do think the numbers are going to be comparable, yes.
So the people who currently serve those warrants, how come they can't be the same people doing the rule of show cause?
I think that they can, but this may tie into a discussion that we want to have a broader conversation with the sheriff's department.
Okay.
But when it comes to warrants, there's sort of there's a long warrant list, and Sheriff-elect Tatelman may be able to discuss that with you, and they have an apprehension unit. I want their apprehension unit going after dangerous people. There's a lot more that the sheriff's office, when they have a warrant, can do to make sure that it's served other than a summons. So I do expect that even if it's the same amount of people, the people who are serving the summons are necessarily going to be less successful by virtue of the fact that they just do not have the same amount of powers that a sheriff serving a warrant does. And so when those summons comes back not served, a lot of times it's incumbent upon the state's attorney's office to prioritize who needs to get served, especially with respect to defendants who have absconded or who have violated important conditions of bond, like staying away from victims, not failing drug tests, not driving, especially if they're charged with a DUI, and that's where the investigators are going to come in. And in addition to that, that's going to be an enhanced caseload on the state's attorney's office. But in addition to that, we also need the investigators who are going to be putting eyes on some of these videos that we're going to need to watch.
Okay. And just, and not to embarrass, but just a point of clarification, the sheriff or the undersheriff here is not the sheriff-elect yet. It's about 6 weeks away still. Oh. Though I'm sure he will be elected. I just wanted to point that out.
The under Sheriff Tatelman, I guess I'm anointing people before, you know.
I congratulate him, though, because I'm sure that he's going to be elected, but it's not quite elect yet, so. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, so to kind of echo what Pat was saying, so the summons is actually paperwork. It's not a warrant, but our our court documents and, you know, whether it's a notice to appear or eviction or any of the documents that come out of the court, the majority of them are served by civil process servers. And some of the higher priority ones are served by, like the order of protections are served by the deputies. These summons that are basically warrants, but paper warrants we're not bringing people in, are known offenders of crimes that we're not going to have our civil process servers serve them, because, you know, it's just the risk that the officer, just as a paper service, is obviously going to be a little bit higher with these services. So those are going to be served by the deputies that are on the road in conjunction with the already warrants that we already are serving, and all the other jobs that are, you know, they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So it's going to be an increased job that we are going to take up on the road that we're already doing. So, and I would agree with Pat that the number, you know, it may be similar to FTA warrants, but I think we have to serve those, you know, to even get to the point. And the warrant and how you, like the process that goes along with, you know, trying to identify first party, make sure that they're there. You know, there's a little bit more teeth, I guess, to the warrants than this paper service, where we can just kind of knock on a door, and it's not like, you know, when we see him inside in a warrant, we can go get the guy. We can't with the paper because it's just a paper. So, you know, there's going to be some hurdles, and those court cases, unless you serve them, they can go on forever. And I mean, until you can serve them, and you know, and that's one of the things that, you know, we're trying to work on, is figuring out, at what point in time does it turn into a warrant, so that, you know, the Safety Act, the way it's written, that individual has to at least be served the summons and then not show up for court, and then a warrant can be issued. But if we never serve them, I mean, this can go on for infinity.
Okay, thank you. My next question is regarding the PR person. In general, I don't disagree with the need. Quite frankly, I think that misinformation is one of the major problems we're facing today. And I think that that's a challenge that exists. My concern is, you had said, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I believe I heard it rightly, that you want to make sure that your thoughts on law enforcement get out there. And my concern is a PR person becoming a political tool to advance a political point of view within, you know, that you may have, or whoever the state's attorney in the future may have, or law enforcement may have. And that is something that I'd be very concerned about, that the information that's being put forward is being put forward honestly and with the information that is correct, and not spun in a certain way to try and meet a certain political point of view. And that would be my only hesitation in supporting that position. The concept of trying to share it across the county and PR is not a bad concept, but I do see where it can present some problems with that person understanding confidences and the things that the state attorney's office deals with, and things along those types of lines. So that would be my only concern from that standpoint in regards to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fair point, and it wouldn't be the first time that somebody sort of abused a PR position. And I think that danger adheres with respect to any PR person that works in any area of government. And so I'm more than happy if the PR person is approved to come back in a year and present to the board the manner in which the PR person was used, so that you guys can formally rule and make a determination as to whether or not they've been ethically and appropriately utilized by the state's attorney's office, just with respect to state's attorney business, as opposed to furthering my own personal political ambitions or interests.
I appreciate that very much. That means a lot. It means a lot. The last thing I wanted to ask was, no, I apologize. You already answered that question. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Altoff.
Just wanted to take a real quick moment to kind of tack on to what Dr. Jensen and Board Member Collins said. You know, that's the challenge in front of us right now, and as we go forward and look at the budget, is to balance the available money and how we're going to ensure that we can pay for all the expenses, but to ensure we're still providing the appropriate services to our constituents. It's going to be a tough balance going forward because of inflation, but that's in front of us, so don't lose sight of that. With regard to the PR person, I would just say, from an economic development position, to get people and businesses to leave the city of Chicago, which has got its own nightmare right now, to come into McHenry County, one of the messages that we absolutely want to ensure we're saying is not only do we have good schools and great communities, but we have a safe community. And however we do that with the Sheriff's Department and the State's Attorney's Department and that coordination, I think that has a bigger message than just for the State's Attorney's office. I mean, we're kind of marketing McHenry County. And again, we're not a Winnebago and we're not a Boone. We are considered a collar county. We have worked forever to be considered a collar county. Don't lose sight of that as we're moving forward. And so a comparison with Kane and Lake and DuPage is certainly appropriate, I think, after all the efforts that we've been doing. So thank you. No more soapbox here.
Thank you, Ms. Althoff. Ms. Meshes?
Thank you. I feel like I'm hammering a point here. So I would say that the PR would be very similar for the state's attorney as is for the sheriff's department, or do you think there's differences that would come between the two PR?
You know,
efforts?
I think the departments are operating on so many, I think both departments are big enough and operating on so many different fronts that there is an adequate amount of work for me for a full-time employee. And I mean, I could put 3 people to work.
And then I guess my other question, which is more for the sheriff's department, how many people are on staff for PR in the sheriff's department?
I'll end up talking about this a little bit more, but I guess a lot of that has to do with, you know, when we have one civilian that is dedicated to social media messaging. We have a sergeant, or a lieutenant, a sergeant, and 2 deputies that are in our special services division. But that is not their sole purpose. They're also out in schools and doing all the PR stuff out and about and working that way. So, and I guess, you know, what Pat's talking about, and I agree with him, is that, you know, when we realized a couple years back that when, you know, we had a couple deputies running our social media. Law enforcement is good at doing law enforcement stuff. We weren't good at doing marketing stuff. So we recognized that, you know, in a time where, you know, media and social media was demonizing our profession, we wanted to bring a civilian in to push our messaging out. And we've seen huge success of that. You know, we just actually, Tim Creighton, one of our deputies in special services, was just re-interviewed on a post we did last year that has millions of hits that, you know, media across the country is interviewing him on. And it just brings the light of all the good stuff that we're doing here in the county. So I think what Pat's talking about is that, you know, it's not just about, you know, what, you know, shared and information that, you know, we work together and made press releases or whatever, but in a time where everyone wants the information right now, we don't have time to wait for, you know, someone getting the message, calling someone and getting it, putting it together, then getting approval, and then going back out, where, you know, we benefit from having someone within our organization that needs an answer right now and pushes it out right now, and it's accurate, because that's the most important part, is you want it to be accurate right away. I think was a benefit for us bringing in a civilian that was solely dedicated, basically for transparency reasons, of the sheriff's office. And I think, you know, I think that's what Pat's looking for too. And I would, you know, it's been successful for us, and I'm sure he would do the same with that.
All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
I would say the Sheriff's Department is the most successful, hands-down department as far as social media presence and views. No doubt. Good job. Thanks. Ms. Jindrak.
Thank you. How many investigators do you currently have?
Two full-time.
Okay.
So we have 3, but we have 2 who are part-time. Does that make sense? So 2 full-time, so 2 FTEs, 3 total investigators.
Okay. And as far as, kind of from what I look at, it looks like law enforcement is probably going to have the brunt of most of this workload. So I'm kind of wondering if there's anything because when I'm looking at the general fund requests, they're not asking for any additional staff to help with these summons, as you mentioned, because these paper summons aren't going to be handled by the investigators. These are going to be handled by law enforcement.
Initially.
And then I guess what
And I guess the point is that as a state's attorney's office, we have to prioritize our prosecutions. And so certain resources need to go more into certain cases with respect to certain defendants as we sort of assign value to different cases, targets, et cetera. So when there are summonses that are not served, we then have to take a look at what those summonses are, or when we initially get the summons, if we want somebody who's not going to just sort of go knock on the door and see if they're there, but rather sit outside the house for a few hours trying to serve them, go to their place of employment, go to other last known addresses, things of that nature. That's what that's what our investigators are going to do. And we think that just by virtue of the Safety Act, there are going to be far more, not only summonses, but also dangerous people who, first of all, are not showing up to court by virtue of the fact that there's no disincentive for them not to anymore because a warrant can't issue for their arrest and they can't be taken into custody. But also because there are going to be so many more people that are released and not in custody, those people who are not in custody, and the reason that they were in custody in the first place is because they were sort of a risk of absconding or not showing up. We just think there's going to be a lot more and a lot more dangerous people who we're going to prioritize for prosecution, who we're going to want to get back into the court system, and so we have to get those summonses served.
And I understand that, but you're saying that any of the major offenders are going to be summoned by law enforcement, not your investigators. So I'm just trying to wonder, can we hold off on the investigators right at this moment and then sort of start to, once they act, and not to mention we have litigation currently pending, so we don't necessarily know how that's going to play out as well. So if we can postpone this in the budget to potentially, honestly, move, it's possible we might have to move funds to law enforcement, to the sheriff's office, because they might have an additional workload that you might not necessarily have if it's only for misdemeanors, and you can have your 3 investigators currently handling it.
So
and I'm trying, and the reason I'm saying this is because we're trying to figure out a balanced budget, number 1, and number 2, where we can cut costs but not minimize services. So we want to make sure that we're balancing everything, but I'm thinking that you might be asking for a little too much, not knowing necessarily what we could be looking at in the 2023 budget.
So I would respectfully disagree. I don't think we're asking for enough. The vast majority of the summonses they're not served, as I talked about. 50% of the summonses that go out for defendants currently are not being served. And our department and the sheriff's department may not have aligned interests with respect to different defendants, and we need to be able to get those people who we consider to be of high importance back into court. And we need to be able to do that in a timely manner with the least amount of red tape. And so that's where I think those 2 investigators come in.
And why do you mention that you're not normally getting these summons out? Why would that be?
So summonses are difficult to serve because you don't have the same type of powers as you do with a warrant with respect to entering people's residence. So a lot of times serving a summons is as simple as nobody home, not served. Whereas our investigators and what they're able to do is to sit on houses, is to sit on places of residence to try to get people. So under the new Safety Act, one of the problems with the law is, in my estimation, is that if a defendant simply makes it a habit of not answering his or her front door, it's very difficult for them to have to answer for the criminal offenses that they commit in Illinois.
Okay, and then just last question. Do we have an idea on when we'll receive any answers for litigation, or do we just plan on January 1st, we're going to be implementing this act until the next steps of the litigation process?
It's a really good question. Our office is involved in the litigation, and the litigation is going to take, in order to reach a final decision, it's going to take longer than a few months. I do expect that for some period of time next year for the Safety Act to go into effect. And with respect to the litigation, if I was going to handicap it, I'd say it's about a 50-50 bet.
Thank
So
you.
it could, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Jindrak. Any other questions for our state's attorney? Seeing none.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Patrick. Bob, do you want to say a couple things? And then I know Dan's got to get going too, so.
Yeah, I'll be quick, yeah. So thank you, guys. Just to parrot on what, or piggyback on what Pat was saying, as far as summons goes, the summons that are issued for in-county is what the sheriff's office is responsible for. I know his investigators go out of county where we rely on other agencies, but let's be honest, if there's a bunch of summons for Cook County, I don't think the Cook County Sheriff's Office is gonna, carry the lion's share of McHenry County summons on top of all the summons that they have as well. So that's the reason why some of them are only served 50%, because we rely on our partners in surrounding counties or whatnot to be able to serve some of those. So, his investigators, like you said, if there's priority cases that he wants, we try to make phone calls to our law enforcement agencies to say, hey, we really need this person to be served. But the reality is we're busy, and, our workload is just keeping, it's increasing daily. And, this is just an additional responsibility that, we have to figure out who's going to be able to carry the lion's share of the load, and we're going to work together on it. But I think, having investigators to, be able to go out and sit on those houses like almost PIs, so they can see, an individual, and then maybe share that information to get that individual served with law enforcement, I think is an additional support, that helps us out as well too. So just to kind of talk about that a little bit. So the body-worn cameras, we are planned to go live Monday on our body-worn cams. We've been testing them for 2 weeks. We brought Axon in, and, to talk more about, like when Pat had talked about, he's going to have additional support to review all that footage for crimes. So for us, we've asked for an IT personnel to handle all the requests from the state's attorney's office, from the defense attorneys, and from the courts when they are requesting for that footage, whether it be in-car camera or a body camera. We needed someone to help support what already is a large amount of requests. We know it's going to double in those requests when it now that we're going to have body cams for all the crimes. And that is a civilian employee. So as far as it goes to the court operations, we talked about the failure to appear warrants. We already are serving those. Some of the things that come up, and that is that if there are, let's say that we do serve the summons and a new FTA comes up, there is going to be not a bond with that. So if an individual is arrested, out of the county, we don't know where that detention hearing has to be held. I would assume it's going to be here in McHenry County. So it'll be our responsibility to go get that individual wherever they are and bring them over to the, back to our county so they can have that detention hearing. So that's another expense that we have to think about. So one of the things when we talk about, our correctional officers, they're going to be a transport team that they have to figure out, and work with that. So that was one of the small hurdles that we don't really talk about a little bit, but down the road could happen, that we have to address. As it relates to the courts, with our correctional officers, we're still working with court admin, the judges, the state's attorney's office on these detention hearings. If the decision is made that these hearings are going to be 7 days a week, so that a public defender or defense attorney wants to have their hearing heard quickly, that's going to be additional responsibilities for us with our correctional officers to make sure that we have someone that is ready to take someone to the courtroom. But we also have to open up the courthouse too. So we'll have our court security staff that has to, one, open the door, be ready because it's a public, be a public court hearing. And we also have to have a court security officer in the courtroom as well. And then we talk about some of our partnerships. So the state's attorney, obviously court admin, and probation are all agencies that we've been working with when we talk about the SAFE-T Act. But some of the responsibilities are going to be electronic monitoring and additional, drug screenings. And those are going to be 7 days a week. And we're working with probation on, an individual can't wait in jail for their electric monitoring. So that's a possible job that our correctional officers are going to have to take, is installing that, assuring that it's working properly, and then getting that up and live and monitoring as well. And then probation, obviously, they're going to be doing drug screens 7 days a week. So we have provided some space that we can help support that as well without having to open up the building and, utilizing our old Block 6 with that. As it relates to the SAFE-T Act, the sheriff, myself, and a couple of our staff members had the Illinois Sheriff's Association, our summer conference, and that was the big talk. So there's a majority of counties that are in opposition to the SAFE-T Act as it reads today. Not in opposition to reform moving forward, but just as it reads today. And if you poll the 102 counties throughout the state, you're going to get 102 different answers on how this has to be implemented. And I think that's the big concern, is that there's really no guidance with this. And as far as the sheriff's office stands, we we're kind of in a hurry up and wait. We have an idea of what it might look like, but the reality is we really don't know what this is going to look like, and it is not a settling feeling, at least for me walking into this. But I know the sheriff's office, as a whole, a lot of the deputies are, a little bit on edge because they don't know what it means. They don't know with some anonymous complaints that can come in on what it means for their job, and we're seeing that in recruitment. And it's been difficult for the office. I know we're prepared for it, but I don't, there's things that we can't prepare for, and I think, Dan can talk more about it, and you heard from Pat on that too.
If
So
you have questions for Rob, can we hold off for the undersheriff? And Dan has to get across the street for swearing in of Judge Manginelli, so good luck.
Yeah, I apologize. I do have to get back across the street. There are a lot of questions and a lot more questions than answers when it comes to this act, okay? As you're meeting to discuss the budget, the judges and the judicial branch of government are meeting throughout the state to discuss implementation and what that looks like. What does January 1, 2023 look like at this point? We do not know. There's not been any determination as to whether or not this is a substantive change or if this is a procedural change in the law. So what does that mean? It depends on how we deal with it. Another issue is, as the undersheriff brought up, is whether or not we have to have court 7 days a week and on holidays. If you read the statute, it indicates 24 and 48 hours as guidelines for detention hearings. There's more to it than that. There's the statute on statute, which is how the court calculates time. There's decisions that have been made. We're looking at a case out of the Seventh Circuit, and what that says as far as probable cause hearings versus detention hearings versus bond setting and those kinds of things. Additionally, one part of the statute talks about the inability of the defendant to pay for a condition of release or other ineligibility for a condition of pretrial release shall not be used as a justification for the pretrial detention of the defendant. So what does that mean? If the person can't pay for electronic monitoring, GPS, scram, drug testing, you can't keep them in detention. That's what that means. Well, then who pays that cost? Well, the statute doesn't say that, but when it comes to indigent defendants, that cost is borne by the county. What does that mean? Probably an additional $175,000 to $200,000 in costs associated with pretrial detention. And oh, by the way, they get day-for-day credit if they're on electronic monitoring. What does that look like when it comes time for the state's attorney in prosecution and incarceration? So there are a lot of questions. I commit to this. We will continue to meet. I have meetings almost every week on this topic with the judges, with the circuit judges, with the criminal division judges to come up with a plan. I hope that soon we will have a direction that we're going to be going. When we do that, we will certainly be sharing that with the county and all of our justice partners, because those decisions will drive some of the other actions that they need to take. So again, we will continue to meet and discuss and debate and try to come up with the proper way to implement this act. Again, as the undersheriff said, if you ask 102 different counties how they're going to do it, they're going to do it 102 different ways. So.
Yep. Was there questions for the undersheriff? Thank you, Dan. Or questions for Dan? Did you have a question for Dan? No. Okay.
Campbell?
This is not so much a question, it's just a comment. I know when the Safety Act was first passed, there was a lot of concern about body cameras and the cost and how they would be implemented and what some of the parameters were. And while I think we can all agree having them is good for both the public and for our officers, I just want to congratulate the Sheriff's Department on a tremendous job getting them implemented and getting them implemented so fast. They really addressed a lot of the concerns, and I think it's been a great rollout. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Ms. Wegner?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for everybody for the presentations. There's so many questions and opinions with all of this. It can be really controversial. So thank you for talking about the facts. And I just want to add one thing that we learned in Law and Government on Tuesday, that the electronic monitoring, it is the cost to the person who will be monitored is a $600 setup and then a $15 a day fee. So there is some cost to the people. But back to you. So one thing that you said is that there's going to be more traveling in different counties by your officers for issuing summons, I guess. How is that different than it is currently?
Well, I think what I'm talking about is that, warrants and summons, so the travel that you're talking about, so not everyone that commits a crime in McHenry County is from McHenry County. So if in our current state, an individual has to post bond, usually there's some incentive for them to come back to the county to show up for court. If an individual who's out of the county is released and has to come back on a summons, there really is no incentive for them to ever have to come back. So we would rely on our partners, whatever county has to serve those summons, we would rely on them and ask them to, continue to serve. The additional travel that I was talking about is if it gets to the point where an individual is given an FTA warrant, and Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know if there's a dollar amount that's going to be assigned to that because of the no bail. What does that mean that when a person is picked up on that, let's say down in Springfield on a McHenry County warrant, they have to be brought back to court, and the Safety Act says that we can't do it virtually either, that it has to be in person. So it'll be the McHenry County Sheriff's Office responsibility to drive down to Springfield, pick that individual up, and bring them back, and that could be on a misdemeanor warrant. That's a lot of work that we don't currently do for misdemeanors where when we have bond, they could bond out and be given a new court date at that correctional facility or wherever they're picked up. So that's the additional expense that I was speaking of.
Okay, thank you. And just real quick, I should know this, but refresh my memory. Do we currently hold court on Saturdays?
We do. We have rights court on Saturday morning. Is at 8 o'clock, I think.
Okay, so we could possibly, if we need to, have everybody available on Sunday. I did think it was interesting. Were you talking to us in law and government saying that there was a county that had a precedent recently about a 68-hour hold instead of the 48?
Yeah, so that was the Gerstein case. It was a federal case. It was out of Winnebago, who does not conduct rights court on weekends, and somebody was picked up on Friday night and didn't receive a bond hearing until Monday morning, and the federal court found that passed constitutional muster.
So we could hope that
Yes.
we could continue that. Okay.
Yes, but that's ultimately going to be a question for court administration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wegner. Mr. Collins?
Thank you. I want to echo what Ms. Campbell said about the body cams. I think that your speed in getting that out and done is commendable. My son's a police officer, and in a recent incident he was involved with, and his body cam is going to basically show what his actions were correct. And so it's going to make a big difference for law enforcement and what they do. My question is, do you anticipate any effect to the staff at the county jail due to the fact that we're going to have less warrants and holding people because they can't pay a warrant? So if there's less population, is that going to affect the staff there, or are you going to reallocate that staff based on some of the other things that need to be done?
Yeah, so we looked at it. One of the things that we wanted to do was see what moving forward the Safety Act would do to our jail population, if it were to go green today. Initially, we thought we were going to lose anywhere 15% of our jail population, and we're hovering around, anywhere from 185 to 200 individuals currently incarcerated at our facility. So we're thinking about losing, what does that come to, maybe 30 individuals. But, there's other factors that go into it. It's not just a one-for-one, we lose one inmate, we lose one correctional officer. We work 3 shifts, so, we have to be able to staff, even if there's one inmate in our facility, we need 3 correctional officers to staff that. But there's more things that are involved with it, especially when we saw what happened with COVID, in that when we bring individuals in, we have to house them separately for an extended period of time, just because, obviously you don't want to bring someone from the outside in and put them, in a STEP program so that they wouldn't infect others. The other issue that we see that's going on is the mental health crisis that's going on. I would say a large majority of our individuals in our correctional facility have some sort of mental health issue. And we are putting people, separating them all over the place in our correctional facility. So, that makes it difficult for us as well to manage. And that's a case-by-case basis. So it's hard to give a number to what that looks like. As far as the individuals go, what it looks like on January 1 with those that are currently sitting on bond in our facility right now, that's something that we've been talking with the state's attorneys on and the judges on what that looks like, come January 1 if we just open the door and say, see you later. I would defer to Pat on that one. and what that looks like. But I think we're also looking for some direction from the state and the legislator on what that means, moving forward as well. So, working with Peter and Pat and what that looks like as far as our jail population, I think we agreed that instead of, jumping to conclusions and just saying, this is what's going to happen January 1, we really, like I had mentioned before, I know it's not a great answer, but we really don't know what it means. And I think we agreed that 6 months down the road, we'll probably have a clearer vision of what that looks like. But, depending on how quickly you can serve a summons and, the failure to appear warrants, the FTA warrants, we may actually see an initial decrease in individuals that are incarcerated, but then no one shows up for court, and when they get served their summons, no one shows up for that. We may actually see a large increase in individuals that are currently incarcerated when they normally wouldn't have been incarcerated with a bond. So, there's factors on both sides. So I think we did a really good job of addressing it, if it were to go in effect day 1 here, and I think that's why we came up with that number that we have right now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Collins, Ms. Jindrak?
Thank you. And I think that you make a really good point, right? In 6 months, we'll probably have a better idea. I think my major concern is if we allocate some of these positions to the state's attorney's office, but then we realize your office really needs more support and we don't have those funds any longer, then are we picking the right funding for the right resource when we have so much ambiguity right now? So that's really my concern, is if you end up needing more, are we going to have those funds available for you once we find out how this is going to look? But my question is, when you mentioned that you had to have IT to come in to review the body cam footage, is it, and I apologize for not knowing, but is all the body cam footage always reviewed, or is it only when there's litigation or problems and then we have to review it and then send it over to the state's attorney?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a great question. So we currently have in-car cameras. We've had in-car cameras for a while. And I think the easiest way I can explain this would be through this process. When we have an in-car camera, it is burnt to a disk. The disk is then entered into evidence by the deputy, and then it sits in evidence. At any given time, we get FOIAs, subpoenas, court requests, state's attorney requests for review. An evidence deputy has to go find that disk, burn that disk, and then submit it to the proper resource. And that's on top of the records division that gets it and then submits it. So really, it touches 2 individuals at our office to get that out. The IT specialist that we're looking for is going to be strictly for digital evidence. We are no longer going to be making disks that we have to copy and burn. This individual is going to do the redaction for the videos to make sure that it's appropriate to the individual that it moves forward. They are not going to be responsible for the review as it relates to policy, procedure, and whatnot. That additional response is going to fall on the supervisors, where they're going to do spot audits on each deputy of an in-car camera and a body-worn camera monthly to assure that our standards are not just met but exceeded. So the IT specialist is the civilian role to help offset the additional need that is going to come about of all the body-worn cameras, because by statute, every time an officer in uniform conducts a law enforcement function, they have to initiate their body camera. And we just got an opinion from the state's attorney's office. That means that civil process servers, when they get out of their car to serve a paper, that's a law enforcement function. So imagine, I don't know how many pages of documents we get out of the state's attorney's office to serve. It's a large amount. And when you think about all of those now, that where an individual is going to say, well, that civil process server, he didn't really serve me, and now that once that gets out, we're looking at tripling and quadrupling our amounts of requests for digital evidence, and that's what that person will be responsible for.
Okay, and that's the only salary that you're requesting. You have the new IT business analyst, that's that position?
That's that position, right? Yes.
Okay, and because you only have, and then the other cost is a ballistic shield, so your office is only asking for $110,000, give or take, but the state's attorney is asking for $350. So again, maybe just for everybody to keep in mind is, if we end up having to move some of that to your office, but we don't have any of the funds available because we were kind of proactive on the state's attorney side, but not proactive enough on the sheriff's side, that's just my main concern. But I do appreciate all your information, and thank you so much.
Any further questions from members? Seeing Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. That took a little longer than I anticipated, but it's a good discussion. Really is. Tanya, you asked me yesterday how long this was going to take. I said 2 hours, but we'll get through this. We'll get through this. I want to reiterate one point, and it was made earlier. Kane County, they're asking for north of 40 new employees related to safety. DuPage County, over 60. Our group, there's a lot of trust, a lot of a conservative approach. I've been really proud of how everybody's approaching this. They're asking for 6. So just keep that in mind. So I appreciate that. Where are we here on our show? Kevin, do you want to go to the next?
Yep.
Our focus today, as we said, is the general fund. We have multiple funds that with tax levies, but we've balanced everything. We've zeroed everything out but for the general fund, because that's really where the movement wants to be. So as we continue our discussion today, we're going to focus solely on the general fund, and I want you to understand that this other 171,000, most of that increase is related to the MCDOT's project on Randall Road. All these other funds are balanced, and we squared them away. So as when you look at the supplemental requests, again, these are all taken care of. They're all built in. So we're zeroing in on the difference between expenditures and revenues in the general fund. So Kevin?
Yeah, so I guess for the more exciting part of the budget discussion, this slide shows just the total amounts, right? And the reason why we're not showing the breakdown or anything is because Carrie has done a really amazing job with Questica, and there's going to be a dashboard where you can drill down on every fund down to the main account level, reviewing what happened in 2021 actual, reviewing what we budgeted for 2022, and then where we are as of September, and then what we're proposing for 2023. So that's the reason why you see only the overall amount. Carrie's going to go to, at the end of the presentation, she's going to go and show you where this information is at, and we're going to link it up on our website. So that's why we're not seeing the different scenarios. These are all special revenue funds, enterprise funds, and any other major funds that we have outside of the general fund. And then you see they're all balanced. So regardless of what happens with the levy, these amounts will remain the same, adding the supplemental requests. So the focus for today is the general fund. And in the general fund, this is where really the different scenarios that we have been talking about, where they come into place. And so you see, we show what the 2022 budget is, and then we're showing on the second column what the best, or I guess the highest allowable tax levy increase would look like for the general fund or for the fiscal stability of the county. So under that scenario, it's a 5% increase, and then based on the CPI, which is what the state has published, and then it includes a new growth of about 500,000. So that would generate about $94.3 million against the $92.9 million in expenditures. You add the supplemental request. I apologize that the amount shown on the slide is different from what's on the detail. This one is showing 885,000 versus the 853,000. Carrie clarified that there were some changes on the salaries that went down, so that amount will be different and will be updated on the slide deck, and we'll send that out. But the difference is about $30,000, so in the bigger terms of the budget, it's a small percentage. But keeping that in mind, so under scenario one, if the board went and increased the levy by 5% plus the new growth, that would result in covering all the supplemental requests and keeping a surplus of $547,000. Again, this is just scenario one, and then you see what happens with scenario two, just doing the CPI increase. And then once we get into only new growth, then we're looking at 2.9 million deficit. Then we're looking at scenario four, which is keeping the flat levy amount at 3.5 million deficit. And that's really a scenario for when we're talking about these different scenarios, we're looking at which scenario we can look into that is a halfway point, and that's where Pete and Finance Committee Chair Scal is we're gonna talk about. So the next slide shows, Pete, I'm sorry, go ahead and do your introduction here.
This is a big slide. This is a big slide, and if maybe this is one to take home and absorb a little bit. It shows a kind of a 10-year history of what we've done with our fund balances and the strength of those fund balances, and how we have used those fund balances over the last 5 years to really reduce what we've asked of our property taxpayers. You see the two lines coming together. I don't think that's a negative. I think that's a positive. I think that shows how we work together to use the tools and levers that we have and the strength that was built in the first 12 years of this decade to kind of get here. But what you also see, we're on a trajectory that isn't sustainable. So we've got to do some course correction here. You know, that fund strength was powerful. And we made the decision to use some of that fund strength to bring that down starting in 2016. We went from a 6-month reserve to a 5-month reserve. That was probably the biggest single reduction in that fund reserve. But we also used some of our tort fund. We thought that was a little strong there. Scott's helped us out. He manages that fund, and I think we're putting more money back there this year to strengthen that. We had an IMRF fund that has been real strong in relationship to the performance of the market and our own reduction in staffing over the last many years. So that IMRF's been strong. Our transition that Cheryl has led to the IPBC fund has really helped us in our controlling of expenses, and we dipped into some of our excess monies in our insurance fund last year. It was another rock we earned return. We've done a lot of different things using our strength to get us here. But we're kind of we're running out of levers to pull, and we've got some creative ideas we want to talk about in a bit. But this is I don't want anyone to think this is a negative slide. I'm proud of this. I'm proud of the dollars that we've saved taxpayers over the last 5 years, and I think we're in a position again to do some more good work. But you just see it. We're on a trajectory that we do need to make a little bit of a course correction.
So the next slide shows where we are at as of fiscal year 2021 when it comes down to fund balances. What I'm showing here is just the funds that are supported by the levy. So this does not include special revenue funds or any user fee funds that are managed by the different departments or different elected officials. So the point of this slide is, we looked at where we are at with the general fund, so that's the corporate levy. For example, right now we are at 5.5 months of that 5-month policy. I would not recommend going down below that because to account for inflation, expenses are going to continue to increase. So that means that fund balance requirement is going to get higher. So I always recommend to have a little bit of cushion above what the policy recommends or it's recommended. So in this case, we are right at that point. This is taking into account that in fiscal year 2022 or 2021, we saw an increase of fund balance in the general fund. And due to the stronger than projected revenues, which we use to address the county highway fund, which you see where we are at right now. So the county board this month approved a $3 million transfer from the general fund to county highway to address that. And then the fiscal year 2023 budget includes an increase on the county highway of $1.5 million to go towards rebuilding this fund balance. All these numbers are key, and they're being looked at by credit rating agencies, by the MSRB, which is the federal arm that looks at governments and accountings and everything else, the accounting for funds. And so obviously this is pointed out day in, day out about the county being fiscally strong because of this factor here. We do not see in fiscal year 2022, the way that we budgeted, we do not see these amounts decreasing significantly. Like I said, we are actually taking steps right now to rebuild the county highway fund. And we do want to point out, nursing home Valley High, there's the term changes because it's an enterprise fund. That's more of an accounting thing, but it's an unrestricted net position for that fund of 28.8 million. That's very strong for this fund, and we're looking at that and you'll see that towards the end of the presentation as part of the recommendation. Not necessarily tapping that directly, but there is ways that we can go about that, and we'll address that later.
Use that strength to everyone's advantage, right?
Right. So that's where we are with the fund balances and where we compare to our own board policy. This slide is more for information purposes only. I'm not going to go through each one of these.
This is to be read at home.
Yep. Yeah, and also, I mean, this was one of those things where it's the reasoning behind these graphs here, which is a lot of data in one slide. So that slide, it's kind of how I got to these numbers. But what we're looking at is a 10-year forecast of, and we're looking at two different scenarios. The first one that I'm going to go through is the a 10-year forecast if there's no CPI and no new growth implemented or incorporated into this year's levy. So what it does for the county's fiscal stability, and again, this is forecasting. I included my assumptions, but those are assumptions and they're as good as what the actual data show over the last 5 years, which we know have changed a lot with the pandemic. So in this case, the way that you go about these is you start with our audited financial statements, which is fiscal year 2021, and that shows that we had a surplus of $4.2 million. I already pointed out that we used $3 million of that to rebuild the county highway fund. Then we get into fiscal year 2022. That's a balanced budget, so that's why you see zero. There's no deficit, there's no surplus, it's balanced. Now, if we have seen these numbers before, fiscal year 2023, without any increase on the levy, it's a $2.7 million deficit. And then as salaries and expenses and commodities continue to increase, even with the stronger revenues that are not levy funded, they still don't keep up with the trend of expenses increasing, right? So you get to fiscal year 2024, we're looking at a $4 million deficit. 2025, close to $5 million, and then you see that deficit increasing. And again, that's taking into account stronger revenues on sales tax, income tax, and all those that are economy driven.
In this model, that's the only area where we're going to grow.
Right.
If we're not going to touch property tax for 10 years, that's the only, we have the unpredictable non-property tax revenues, and what are they going to do?
Correct. And some of these things, for example, some of the assumptions, what it's done in terms of sales tax, what the pandemic has done to the business community and how consumer behavior has changed with online purchases and everything else. We don't really know how that's going to be leveling off, once the pandemic, or if it's over, and what's going to happen over the next 5 years. So this is, again, assumptions based on what's happened or what the actual activity for the county has been over the last 5 years averaged out. So go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, so this slide and the next slide are really, to me, real critical to the discussion we're having today. And I asked for these slides to be in here because we can't just, it's not prudent to just simply look at next fiscal year without looking out into the future. And to me, the reason why I asked for these slides to be in here is because, yes, we can balance the budget this year.
This is the hole we got to fill.
Right.
2.6.
And we're going to come with recommendations for that. The problem that, we have is that's using, again, some, as Pete put it, some levers that we are able to manipulate. And it doesn't provide for the county a long-term health. And so by showing this slide and the next slide, you're going to see that without taking some of the CPI this year, what the concern is that going out in future years, the board won't have any levers in order to balance the budget. And so the concern is that you can't just look at this year, you have to look at multiple years out. And so with looking at this slide and the next slide, you're going to see how by not taking CPI, and this is by taking all of it, you know, this shows a healthy positive. And so you'll see in our recommendation where we kind of take that and combine it so that it gives future boards options, and that gap that is a negative number is a manageable negative number at that point. Where, meaning if future boards decide to take new growth or future boards decide to take CPI, it gives them that ability to close the gap. If you go back a slide, when you get to these numbers out here, and you know, as further you go out, you know, it's more and more difficult based on assumptions. But at least for the next 3 or 4 years, these deficits are going to become unmanageable unless you cut service or change operational behavior that we have here. And so it becomes much more difficult for future boards to make decisions on how to balance a budget.
Yeah, go ahead.
This slide, I wanted to point out, this approach of basically maximizing what you can take from property taxes, you see you build quite a bit of strength over year. And it kind of represents the way this board approached property tax for the first 11 years of this century. And it was a different time, let's admit that, and it was a different board. We were growing extraordinarily fast. The population was going up, and there was a little bit of a different mentality on property taxation everywhere. But that's how we built the strength that we enjoyed, you know, a few slides ago. That's how we got here, right? And then we've intelligently brought it back, but we've got to continue to look out multiple years to do this as intelligently as we can.
Oh.
Kevin, did you have any more comments on this?
Yeah, so the only other thing is more set up for the next slide. So are we taking questions right now? Or?
Any questions on that part? Jim?
Yes. When we do this 10-year, these bar charts here, the CPI growth, am I assuming that you're taking 0 for the 10 years, or you're doing a maximum of 5% for 10 years on each one?
No, that goes back to the assumption page. So you go back to the assumption page, which has all of that information on it. So when you're when you're not taking anything, you're not taking any new growth, you're not taking any CPI. It's nothing for all 10 years. When you look at the assumptions for the other model where you're taking, this is where he comes back and he tells you what he's taking for the CPI and potentially new growth for the 10-year forecast.
CPI is throttling back from 5 to 3 to 2.
Yeah, and that's based on what the Fed has it's what they're trying to do with, for example, right now increasing interest rates by 75 points. They have committed to another increase before December. Their goal is to get the inflation down to 3%, eventually leveling it off at 2%. Again, that's the assumption that I use based on that information that the Fed has published. Whether they're going to get there or not, we'll see. But that's where that CPI comes from.
That answers my question. Thank you.
So again, we set it up where we got no increase to increases, and then we talked about at the last meeting that we had, we talked about the options that we're looking at: revenues, expenditures. So over the next few slides, what we're going to talk about is the options that we have on the revenue side, the options that we have on the expenditure side, and then we're not saying that those are the options that we're pointed out as we're talking about them. Those are coming at the end, and we're going to talk about that. So just keep that in mind when we talk about these slides. So the first one we talked about was using some of the ARPA funds to fund those projects that are eligible under the U.S. Treasury guidelines for ARPA funding, and so these would be coming out of the external amount that the county has allocated under ARPA, and that's a 1.4 million take from those funds to work on these two projects. So what we know about these is that these are buildings, these are projects that are to serve the general public, and then also they're non-operating expenditures. So we will not, once we complete these projects, we will not look at these projects again over the next 10 years or 15 years. And so that's the theory or the thinking behind that.
And just to be clear, so this scenario is taking money out of the money that the board has already said that we'd be giving to the public for public, whatever.
We have about $15 million right now uncommitted.
Right.
Correct. So
it would be using it, because we already said that we were gonna be using 30 million for ourselves roughly. This would be adding to that over and beyond the 30 million.
Thank you.
Do you want questions now, or?
If we could hold off to the end, just because yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
This is one item that we have talked about in the past and is showing more information about what the county option motor fuel tax allows for us, where we are right now, and what our potential revenue out of these line item would be. So right now the rate is at 0.044. Initially, it was set up at 0.04, and then that increases with inflation, and that's driven by the state. That's part of the law. And in any kind of increases that we see here in McHenry County, each penny generates about $1 million in revenue. And just kind of to talk about what Scott Hennings has mentioned at the DOT, this is a revenue item that we are expecting to see. Even if implemented, they will still go down and decrease. So we have to be mindful of that.
It was noted a week ago that a gas tax is regressive. I guess that's undeniable, but it's also a user fee. It's also applying a revenue to the people that are relying on the roads and using the roads. We have a revenue mix that we all use. The state relies heavily on income tax. County government, school government relies a lot on property tax. Local, city governments rely on sales tax. It's a mix. We have, and each revenue stream has advantages and disadvantages. We certainly know there's wealthy people without a lot of property, or there's big property owners that don't make a lot of income. I mean, so there's different mixes there, but. This is a tool that I think should remain on our consideration list, if not this year, in the years to come, because it will generate dollars for us. How would this help us on property tax? That's a very fair question. We levy money. We have space in our aggregate levy for matching tax and bridge tax that Joe and his staff use for construction projects. If we replace that money with $2 million that 2 cents could get us, we could shift that available levy space to the general fund without increasing the overall levy. It's just another tool.
Oh, yeah, because, cars are becoming more efficient, and also the EV market, it's getting bigger as well. So that's less fuel that people need to purchase. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. There is a trend that consumption of that has gone down because of that.
The only offset to that, we know cars are getting more efficient. We know there's more electric cars. The only offset is population growth, right? We've been very stagnant for 15 years.
And part of our discussions were that people aren't generally traveling to work as much as they were.
That is correct.
They're working at home more often.
Correct.
If you take the train during the day, there's fewer people on the train, there's fewer people in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next one is also something that was brought up in the past, and at this point again, because of the rates and where we are, this wouldn't be something that we would recommend to do right now. But it is a tool for the county, especially having zero debt right now. But this is just one example. The current lending market is just not where we need it to be, especially because we are in, as you saw, we have a strong fund balances that we can tap into if we need it without having to, incur all these interest costs. But it is an option that if long term we want to look into for projects, then that's a different conversation from today's budget discussion. But just giving you an example, if the county were to borrow $5 million, issue a $5 million bond at a rate of 4% right now, that's an annual payment of close to $500,000, and over the 15-year, that would cost about $1.8 million. Again, how the budget will change. Right now, we would incur that cost. We wouldn't have to appropriate the $5 million right away, but we would have to appropriate $449,000 every year over the next 15 years. So again, right now it's a tool, and I don't think it's a tool that we want to implement in this budget cycle.
Most often associated with a project.
Right.
Or something we're building, and not just for operating. And that's what we need now is operating money.
Well, and that's the key. When you're looking at project-oriented borrowing, that is for a long-term road or a building or something. And when you're talking about operational, that's a reoccurring cost, expense to the county. You're borrowing to try and balance a whole, but you're borrowing against future problems. I mean, I hate to say this, but this is a classic, state of Illinois. This is what we do. We borrow money to balance our budget for this year, and we'll let future legislators try and figure out how to fill that hole later. And they sell bonds. City of Chicago does the same thing, and this is not a road that the county should be going down. If we want to borrow money because we want to build roads or build a bridge or whatever, to me that's a viable discussion because it's something that is a permanent structure that will be built. But for operating, this is...
If you can borrow to accelerate the construction, versus having to wait to save it up, that makes a lot of sense. That's exactly what this organization did with Raycow Road.
Right.
We wanted that project. We accelerated the construction by borrowing money.
This is... What are you gonna?
Yeah, just simple. Again, on the subject of financing, we've had a lot of discussion about leasing vehicles. This is a very, very simple explanation of a simple leasing tool that it shows that, it shows it can work. And we kind of have the enterprise model on the left and what we are trying on the right. I think we acknowledge that this can be effective. We're giving it a shot with some pickup trucks that we acquired last year, and we look at get some more. We're trying the simplest, most easy to flip vehicle. That's a Dodge pickup truck, but we're going to see how it goes. I don't think it's the answer for the budget, but I want to acknowledge that it has some merit, and we're giving it a chance.
Well, and so just to point out in this slide, I mean, you can see where our payment is roughly 4,000 less than enterprise as actual numbers right now. So, and this is in the first year. So the first year is where you would see probably the least amount of savings, and you would see more savings later on. So this scenario in itself, the plan that we're currently using without using enterprise, we're actually saving money over the enterprise model that was presented. I believe this is something we should continue to always look at because, enterprise is, as we heard before, they didn't used to do pursuit vehicles. Now they're doing pursuit vehicles. So I think this is something that should always be on our radar, and whether it's every year or every other year, we should always be looking at this as a way to possibly meet the needs of our fleet. And I don't ever want to just say it's not good, because that's probably not true. And as things evolve, this is something we should always be looking at. Right now, it's not something that we can utilize to fix our current budget and potentially future budget, but definitely we should continue to look at this.
This is a big slide. And I want to spend a moment on it. The county already, I think, does a good job of budgeting for our most expensive thing, that's personnel, and that we hold back a little bit of money from our larger offices. We hold back 2% of our staffing costs and 1% from our smaller offices, just because we realize there's always vacancies. You know, Scott and I do an employee orientation every Monday morning. Every Monday morning, there's another 5 or 6 people joining our organization. That means 5 or 6 have left. So there's always a churn, and that creates dollars that don't get spent. So when we budget for personnel, Carrie holds back again 2% from the larger departments and 1% from the smaller departments, and we keep that in our non-departmental budget. As we get to October, if we see that a department has stayed staffed all year long, they're going to need some money, and we let it go back. So we've been doing that for years. We're doing it effectively. It's one of the ways we, I think, help keep control of our costs rather than pushing all the money out into the offices and departments. We are in a very unique hiring time right now. I think we all acknowledge that. We've got vacancies up and down the organization. I don't think that's going to change by December 1. And I think as we're looking to build this budget, I think we have to acknowledge that we're going to have a greater than average number of vacancies December 1, and probably March 1, and probably June 1. And we'll use that to our advantage. We're going to proposing to hold back more dollars. So maybe if we're going to have 20 general fund positions vacant on December 1, let's acknowledge that. And let's acknowledge that most of those aren't going to be filled by February 1. This is a tough time right now. And hold back some additional dollars. So we're proposing about $500,000 could be held back additionally in the general fund only. It's a much broader problem than just our general fund. Joe's got 7 vacancies in DOT right now. Tom Manarola has a ton of vacancies at Valley High, we know, in the Valley High Fund. But in the general fund, I think we've got an opportunity to help us close that gap. Remember, there's a $2.6 million gap we're trying to fill. We have an opportunity for about $500,000 to help us get there, and then we'll kind of reset. We've acknowledged with all of our offices and departments we're going to have to check in next year and see how we're doing. So.
Well, and I challenged Pete on this when he was showing this to me, because my question was, well, what happens if, economy slows down and suddenly we get fully staffed? Is that going to happen? I don't know. But, my concern was, what's the safety mechanism that we put, as a county, we put in place? Because if, this is a recommendation, so we're taking $500,000 off the table, what do we do if we're able to staff? And so, Pete's answer to that to me was that, well, there won't be money set aside, and we will be monitoring that, and then we will probably come back and we'll have to either freeze positions, meaning they can't hire them, or we'll address that in a mechanism that would keep this.
In that unforeseen event that we rush to full employment by May 1, we'll commit to looking at what positions remain available, where we can make some adjustments. But personnel is the tough one. But I think we have an opportunity here.
Question at the end.
Paula, this is your slide. No, here's, look, this is, we debated whether to remove this altogether. But we put it up last time, and I wanted to do so again. This is tough, but this is a tough environment, and there is an opportunity here to save the taxpayers' money. There is a cost associated with continuing to minimize what we're doing with property tax, and eventually this is going to be a tool that has to be tapped if we don't allow a little bit of growth in property tax, because there is an opportunity here. If we again, we could come up with $500,000. We have a pretty strong reserve in senior service right now, and if we reduce this if we made a decision to reduce senior services by $500,000, that's another $500,000 that can go to that 2.6. we would make that decision now. We'd have a year before allocations would be made in October of '23. I'm not suggesting that we should do that. I'm committed to trying a different way, but it is something that has to be considered on the table, if not this year, sometime soon.
And we're committed to looking at all options,
Thank you, Chairman.
not just specifically picking out any certain thing, all options.
May I say something?
No, I
At the
didn't
end.
get to say that.
Just wait.
I shouldn't have called on you. Yeah, and look,
I want to say this. I mean, do you want me to keep my comments to the very end?
Yes,
or
please.
Is it okay for me to say something now?
Let's get through the
we're
slide.
getting
Coming to
close.
the end.
We're getting close.
Get to the end, put your
so
vote on your.
To the end,
in
and then
keeping
I'll
with the
take my light
tradition of ideas of slides that I really aren't attractive and maybe not recommended is, looking at what we budgeted for non-union wage increases. Unions are going to get good wage increases this December, and they're negotiating for more. And we've acknowledged we're having a ton of problems finding people to join the organization. Attracting and retaining is a real challenge. Proud of this board stepping up mid-year to do what we did, to make some adjustments with Cheryl's lead on our non-union staff. But it's still a challenge, and doing anything other than, I think, a significant increase December 1 is inconsistent with where we've been moving. But it is another option, another opportunity. Kevin, this is your baby.
So this one is all related to the enterprise fund. So as you may know, an enterprise fund it's expected to operate as a company, so self-supporting via user fees or charges for services. We operate 2 enterprise funds, and those are Valley High and ETSB. There are some charge outs that are being done to Valley High, and that's related to liability insurance. But there are other expenditures that are, following the Governmental Accounting Standard Board regulations. We're supposed to charge some of these things out to these enterprise funds because they're getting services from our HR department, they're getting services from administration, finance, and other departments such as IT. The allocation, it can be done either by employee or the overall budget. There's different ways that that accounting standards allow for. So this is one of the options that we're looking at. The first, we are not necessarily at this point to allow for ETSB because we know that they operate, the fees are, they're set by state. And so to allow for some flexibility there, that might be one of those things that at least for fiscal year 2023, we leave out. But Valley High is one of those that is being considered. And so that's what this slide is about. So in a way, if you look at these, in some of these enterprise funds, expenses are being underreported or or being subsidized because through the general fund because these charges are not being allocated properly, or not properly is not the right word to use, but they're not being allocated right now either by choice of the board management, which is allowed as well.
We think this could generate, again, roughly another 500,000.
So the board has had discussions in the past when we even talked about adding the addition on to Valley High. And the board has commented that, we would like that operation to be truly self-supporting, right? We don't need it to be making money, but we don't want it to necessarily be losing money. And so, as we showed in previous slides, that it has a healthy fund reserve right now. And in order for us to be true to what we have said in the past, we should really be allocating dollars to them that are charged to them because it's a service that the county's providing to them. So to me, this is something for our future that we should be doing now. We should have been doing, but we can start implementing now. And then with the new wing that we're adding out there, that'll help with that whole process of, setting bed rates and all of that so that we can make sure that the true costs that they incur are being paid for by the residents that are there.
So before we go on to the next 2 slides, which are the last slides of this slide deck, we presented options on the revenue side, we presented options on the expense side. Now going back to that 10-year forecast and everything else, so the recommendations are presented, and then we'll show kind of what it does to the fiscal stability of the general fund over the next 10 years based on those assumptions that I described. So, your show, Mike.
Thanks. So I felt as chair of finance, it was inherent that I come back to the board with some recommendations. This is my recommendations working with staff on how to balance the budget that we have. So my first one is using the 1.5 from ARPA to do those two projects that we talked about. To me, this is kind of a replacement for the senior services grant situation. Because those ARPA dollars were going out into the community to do good for the community, and so by keeping that whole, you know, this is a lever that we can pull. It's one-time fixed costs. I'm okay with that. To me, this is something that we can do. It still utilizes a lot of money that we're giving back to the community. The $500,000 for the vacancy allowance, that goes back to what Pete was talking about, holding back that a little bit more from what we're currently doing with staffing. Next is the Valley High, which we just talked about. Taking new growth and then taking 1.1 million of CPI out of our 4 million that we potentially can. So it's about 27% of what we actually can take. You know, this is the tough one, right? This is the most difficult out of all of them. And jump to the next slide real quick.
Sorry.
So again, I wanted to bring this slide up because taking the 1.1 goes to the long-term fiscal health of the county. So when we showed those first two slides, the 10-year projections, one which was taking absolutely nothing for 10 years and one taking everything for 10 years, you could see that there should be a happy medium. And so this kind of shows you how you can get to a happy medium. When you start looking at these numbers coming out in 23, 24, 25, 26, yes, they're still negative, but those are very manageable negative numbers. And so that's my objective. My objective is to not only have a balanced budget this year, and to reduce CPI, what we're asking the taxing bodies for, as little as possible, but putting the county on a good financial path going forward. And so that's where I'm at. You know, that's where I feel that we're only taking 27.5% of what we can take in CPI, but it really does wonders as far as keeping the county in a manageable position, both expense and debt-wise going forward, which to me is part of my responsibility. I feel it's your responsibility to, in essence, not be screwing future boards with decisions that we're making right now. This gives future boards plenty of opportunity and options in order to have a balanced budget going forward. And that, to me, that's our fiscal responsibility to the future of our county. So that's the recommendations that we're going to be making. Yeah, so I have asked staff to prepare that as a resolution with this recommendations to go before finance next week. What will happen at that point is that resolution will get voted on at committee, hopefully passed out of committee. It'll go to the full board for October. At the full board in October, it simply gets passed through for 30-day review. And to me, the discussion between all this time will then happen as to, does the board want to look at other options? If the board truly, go back a slide. So let's just say the board decides that they're okay with the first four, don't want to do the last one, or they're okay with the, any one of these they don't want to implement, then the really discussion comes up, well, what else are we going to do? To me, we've talked about this, you know, we are a service organization, and so cuts would have to be done more than likely in staffing. And so it would be the responsibility for staff to then come forward and say, well, depending on which of these you don't make a recommendation for, then we got to try and make that up with staffing somehow. And so that would be how they would be coming back to us as a board and saying, well, we would be saying we're going to reduce out of the open positions that we have in the county. These positions are all going to be eliminated in order to meet a balanced budget. So I'm trying to not add staff. I'm just trying to not reduce staff because that's the main key component of how we operate. And I think taking 1.1, as painful as that is, because I don't like raising taxes, to me that is a key component of keeping the county fiscally sound going forward. That was my thunder, I guess.
Great job. Well, so that's the end of the slide deck, and at this point, we'll take any questions.
Ms. Parrish.
Thank you, Chair. I was curious if you could go back a slide, Kevin. So I'm not sure who this question is for, so I'm just going to throw it out there. And I think it's a clarifying question because I think you may have already answered it. I'm curious in those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scenarios, why the MFT wasn't one of them, like 1 cent on the MFT. And is that, I know we heard a little bit about the EV vehicles, but I'm wondering if we were to go raise it, I think at 1 cent.
So to me, that's a discussion, because remember, we've had that discussion, and you can only implement it twice a year.
Okay.
And so when that would take effect wouldn't be until halfway through the budget year of next year. And so I'm happy to still have that discussion, and that could be a mechanism that we could use for next year's budget. But for this year's budget, we wouldn't, by the time it got implemented, it wouldn't have an impact for this year.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
It can be implemented January 1 and July 1. So if there's a desire to explore that effective July 1, we can do something.
Thanks for the reminder, appreciate it.
Saltoff?
I would feel so much better about that 500K for the vacancies if I kind of sort of knew what those vacant positions were and how vital or crucial they were to those individual departments over time. I just.
So we're not proposing to eliminate any of them. We're assuming they aren't going to be filled.
Currently unfilled positions.
I understand.
Okay.
But again, that's what I'm saying. I understand they're currently not filled. I understand. But that's what I'm asking. If I'm a department head and I'm responsible for providing X service, even though that position is vacant, I am still going to make a huge effort to try and fill it if it's crucial to the overall operating of my division and providing that public service. That's what I'm trying to determine. Or are we saying to inadvertently to those individuals, don't fill these positions?
No, I'm not saying, I think our organization has a pretty good organizational history of only filling what they need, and I think that's reflective in with the exception of last year, the 10-year decline in headcount. So I think the positions we have on the roster are all pretty necessary, but if it gets to be a more difficult situation, we'll have to have those discussions.
I still would like that information,
Okay.
if that's possible. I want to
Which positions are vacant?
Which positions are vacant, in which departments, and it doesn't have to be more than that. And then the other question is, and I'm going to beat Dr. Jensen, and I know it's not part of your proposal, Mr. Scala, but even so, if senior services grants were anything that we talked about, who gets hurt by that? Are there specific programs we funded year after year? Are there specific organizations that we have funded year after year? I just want to know what's the downside?
We'll
What's
get that list.
The damage? Yeah, please. Thank you very much.
Ms. Altoff, Ms. Campbell.
Yeah, I was just gonna go to that last slide you had for clarification. So when you go out past this year, you've implemented your recommendations. Are we going back to the assumptions for what assumptions are you using for the years going out from there?
Yeah,
Were you going back to that page?
Correct. So this one takes into account year, so 2024 CPI of 3%, and then forward CPI of 2%. Again, that we're thinking, our thoughts behind this was that that's an option for the county board. You know, it doesn't mean that the county board will implement it or anything. It just means that's what it will look like for the county board if in 2024 CPI is 3% and there's a deficit that can be addressed by increasing it. That's an option.
Ms. Campbell, Ms. Schofield.
Thank you. I just want to say first, this has been a long time coming. I think the last several years we've kind of had this discussion about, you know, there has to come to an end. If you look at one of those early charts on where we used to be to where we are today, I mean, we have to acknowledge the significant decrease that has occurred over the past decade, even since, you know, many of us have been on here. And I appreciate all of the work. I just want to say that first and foremost, I appreciate all the work that goes into this because it shouldn't be taken lightly by any board member. And I know sometimes that it gets to be this like political hot potato that gets tossed around, and that work that really goes behind it by staff and by you, Mike, is really forgotten. So I know it's there and I appreciate it. So I don't take your recommendations lightly and I really appreciate them. I actually support them, so I'll make it easy on you because of the fact that I do know that so much has gone into this, and we've had the discussion over the last few years that, you know, in order to maintain our financial strength, we have to do something. I think it's very creative of what you've done. I don't really have a question because I just wanted to acknowledge that before all the people start ripping it apart. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Schofield. Ms. Meshes.
Thank you. So I have two things. One was.
You're supposed to start off saying, I totally agree with what Carolyn just said.
Well, but maybe I want to rip you apart.
Oh, okay.
It might be the start of it. I don't think I am. I appreciate everyone's efforts. And the leadership and finance. Thank you. So the two things that I want to bring up, one was when we look at the recommendations that are being brought forth, I believe it's $4.1 million of change. But when we look at the 10-year forecast, we're still saying that we're going to have a negative, just a little bit over 1 million deficit. So how are we adding 4.1 with changes and still having a 1 million deficit when I would have thought we'd have a 1 point?
This is next fiscal year.
So
This is the year. This is the year that we're looking at.
Right, and we're saying that 1 million that would be covered by non-revenue or non-levy revenues. So I'm not including it on this year's forecast because these are recommendations that haven't been set, or we haven't got general approval from the board. But we know that that 1 point, the fiscal year 2023 number that you see there, plus the tax levy amount, would cover what the overall deficit would be, inclusive of the deficit plus the supplemental request.
So I was trying to compare page 11 to page 22, which is going to be hard to do on the screen, but I can do quickly in my hand, right? So on page 11, we show no CPI, and no new growth. We would anticipate a deficit of 2.6 million for this upcoming budget.
Right.
But then if we take the recommendations, which would be a 4.1 million change, instead of having what I would thought would be a positive then for on page 22, we still have a $1 million
So it's
deficit.
It's 2.6 million plus the supplemental request of 885,000 that I show there. So those two numbers combine.
We get to nearly 4 million there.
Yep. So those two numbers plus
3.4 then.
right, plus and then the recommendations being
4.1.
We'll minimize what they ask, or
Yeah, so for
It
example.
doesn't square exactly. There's some rounding in there.
Yeah, so for example, 1.5 million, if you look at the breakdown of the project, that was rounded up. It was whatever the two projects that I mentioned in there was. The 500,000 for the vacancy allowance, that was rounded up from 475,000. So that's kind of how that number is. It's adding up to more than what's being requested. But at the end of the day, it would be levying exactly what we would balance the budget to show.
Minimizing the levy would absolutely be the goal, and that would be where we would look to make up, if there's savings there, we would do there.
Well, I guess, I mean, the problem is, like, it seems like there's a 700,000 difference even right now, what you're saying between, like, and that's like a really large rounding error, right? Okay, so I'll go to my other point. My other question was that I had stated in our last larger meeting that I'd be interested in seeing what's happening, what's our anticipation for our fund balance at the end of this year. Before I said, when we looked at the audit for last year, I thought like, oh, we had a lot of growth that I did not anticipate seeing. So last year we had a forecast that led me to support taking new growth, and then I see, oh, we actually had a growth in fund balance, which I thought surprised me. And I'm wondering, given the fact that we have had so many unfilled positions and other events, where's our fund balance at between what we thought it was going to be? So last year we had a prediction. Where are we at on that prediction?
Yeah, so we include that in our fiscal year 2022 budget. And so if you look at our document itself, and we're going to go through that at the end of the presentation, where we have that forecasting of the fund balances for 2022. And again, keep in mind that we're almost a year and a half out whenever we're actually doing these forecasts. So for example, to address your question about the growth that we saw in 2021, we didn't expect so much federal funding coming through. That was not part of the forecast. That was a variable, that was an outlier that was not there for us. And then we didn't see, for example, some of the cannabis revenue coming in so strong either. We didn't see some of the video gaming and what's happening with that revenue line item. And those are very hard to predict, and we had to wait until the pandemic kind of, if there's ever going to be an endpoint to it, for that to level off. So that's why we always put the caveat, these are the assumptions that we used, and this is forecasting. So if I were right on the money, I probably wouldn't have this job. I'd probably be in another kind of position, but that's kind of where those assumptions, I always will disclose kind of what those assumptions are, and they can go up and down.
Right. Well, so I mean, when we look at the recommendations, I'm totally in support of saying remove this, the 500,000, removing funding for vacancy allowance, because we are so vacant. Because I think that that's actually money that we aren't going to spend, right? Because we aren't going to fill all our positions. And so I know Pam wants, and I respect that Pam wants to see what positions are still open, but there's so many that I feel like that is a good move to reduce the funding because we're just not going to pay out those salaries. I do think that we should think about MFT, because even though it's not going to be collected until later in the year, it has twofold. It is painful to pay more gas tax, but it also would be encouraging and an accurate cost for the environmental cost. So I don't think we should throw off the MFT suggestion just because it's not going to hit us right now. I think that it does affect the budget. So I would put that in too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Thorson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any one of these 3 10-year forecast recommendation graphs, we can take them as a point of reference, because what I'm talking here about is the anticipated growth in county expenditures. And what I think would make looking at a graph like this very meaningful is looking at what happened the last 10 years and in real numbers, so we can have that to compare this to. Because right now, I'm looking at a massive increase in my mind of government expenditure over the next 10 years anticipated. And we've heard countless people come before us during all these budget hearings and tell us how much money they've been able to save over the course of 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. That's a trend that, it may not continue, but it certainly kind of takes these assumptions, which are just based on, cost of living and what have you. How much more government are we going to provide? I'm looking at this, it looks to me like, we're gonna go from $86 million in expenditures anticipated 10 years from now, $132 million in anticipated increase in expenditures, and it seems to me that over time that would probably be surpassing CPI quite a bit. So I think we need to kind of look at what happened in the last 10 years under the same circumstances. For me, I'm only seeing half of the anticipated picture. When I look at the forecast, I like to look at what's the foundation of that forecast. So I would recommend that before we have our finance meeting, we have that prior 10 years to compare that graph to future anticipated 10 years. Thank you.
Last 10 years of expenses.
Yeah, we can add that.
General fund expenses.
The only caveat to that is that all these, as I mentioned before, this was all pre-pandemic. So the pandemic has changed a lot. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at that.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Chairman. I will echo some of what Ms. Schofield said. I do appreciate all the work that's been done in this. I mean, I know it's not easy and there's a lot done, and you probably wish you were wearing a shirt with a target on it because you're getting ready for what's going to happen. And I think overall, there's two comments that you made, Mr. Scott, that I think are very appropriate. One is that we need to be thinking long-term. Short-term thinking is what got us, I believe, got us into this position we're in today. We tend to, as governmental agencies and government bodies, when things are good, we think they're going to stay good. And we anticipate that happening and going on and taking place. And the fact of the matter is probably every 10 to 15 years, we go through a recession or some type of upheaval in our economy. We all stand around scratching our heads going, nobody could have anticipated this. And the fact of the matter is we probably could in many cases. So to that effect, a couple questions for clarification. One is the ARPA money. And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we were getting 2 installments of ARPA money.
We have both
total
already.
about, pardon me?
We have them.
Oh, okay, so we're taking the money from the first batch of 20 million, that's where this 1.5 is coming from?
No, we're assuming it's all here.
Okay.
So it's 59.8 million. You made the decision that half would go to McHenry County government projects, half would go to the community. We're proposing of that half that go to the community, 1.4 may additionally be transitioned to McHenry County projects in the sense that they help the community even on their own.
So are those gonna be the projects that the different organizations are applying for, or is this gonna come from the money that potentially was gonna be used for water projects and things like that?
This would be from the half of the allotment that was assigned for organizations to apply to.
Okay.
Understanding we've got about $15 million that have not been assigned, so we're not taking it from anyone.
I understand, but it's
We're
not gonna be.
reducing that amount that we'll have discretion over to apply. Once we get over the budget, we get back into that advanced McHenry County mode in November and December.
So, because we talked about getting Advanced McHenry potentially back open again, but there'll be $1.5 million less available to the community for that.
That's what we're proposing.
Okay. For the 1.1 million of the CPI, what is gonna be the cost, if that happens, what would be the cost per household for that?
I'm glad you asked that because Member Vijek asked me that yesterday, and you have to make a zillion assumptions, of course, but what's an average McHenry County single-family home paying property tax? I picked 7,000.
That's probably about,
right?
yeah,
I don't know. But, on that 7,000, and we would be increasing. We levied about 70 million last year. So we'd be going to 71.1, 71.2. We figured that $7,000 home would be hit by about $14.
for the year?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
That, super high level give you an order of magnitude. Right.
Okay. And then, Mr. Thorson brought up the past 10 years looking at that revenue. And I can appreciate that. I'm not sure necessarily what that's going to show us. What inflation has done to numbers and commodities and things like that's an issue. Looking at the special requests and I support what we need to do at the state's attorney's office, but that's about a third of the requests that are coming in. And that's a third that's going to stay here in the out years. So if you look at that, $500,000 or so, that's $500,000, and that $500,000 is going to grow every year. So even just looking at that, you can see why the budget's going to grow every year, just from that simple standpoint. And then the adjustments we have to make on salaries so we can attract people to try and fill these openings, those salaries are going to go each year, and that is going to cause those increases as well. So regardless of what we want to do to try and control expenses, our base expenses will go up every year from the simple fact that people get increases and costs of goods go up, even if inflation was 3%. And then my last point or question is, when we do these assumptions, and we're looking at 3% and 2%, and I recognize they're coming from the Fed and things like that, but should we be doing worst case scenario assumptions, and saying to ourselves, realistic, if we don't think it's going to be 3% next year, should we be looking at maybe it's going to be 5% or 6%, so we have a better idea what the worst case scenario would be versus potentially best case scenario? Just a thought.
Well, and I think part of when you're looking at the assumption side of it, you're also looking at what the opportunity is for the board, right? So let's just say, inflation was, something north of 3, that means that theoretically CPI could increase whatever that inflation was. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but, it still gives that, to me, anytime we were looking at the revenue or expenditure side of the equations, to me, you take past data, you try and trend that forward, and then you make the best guesses you can based on information that you have, which is constantly changing, but that's how we look at it. So to me, when Kevin presented because originally we didn't have a slide that had all of his assumptions, he was verbally telling me, I'm like, okay, well, I can't remember all this stuff. Put it on a slide so that people can see it. Because you don't want to ever hide your assumptions that are creating models. You want people to know you can argue what those assumptions are, but, in essence, you want to at least know what they are. So to me, they seemed very reasonable. The Fed has made no secret about what they're trying to accomplish. And so to me, it seemed as reasonable as we could predict.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that, thank you. That's all, sir.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to pause here for a moment. Our state's attorney has somewhere he needs to be, and we would need to enter executive session due to litigation for a few moments. So I'll entertain a motion to enter executive session pertaining to litigation. Mr. Thorson, seconded by Ms. Altoff. Kathy, could you roll call vote, please?
You get the hot seat again.
If we could turn off our microphones, please.
Good job, yeah.
make a motion to go back into open session. No, we made a motion to leave.
Mr. Scala makes a motion, to go back in open session, seconded by Dr. Jensen. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Against, motion carries. We'll be back up.
Hey, let's have some more questions.
I just have that one.
Ms. Jindrak.
When we're looking at the enterprise funds for Valley High.
Can you put
I'm
your,
so sorry, thank you. When we're looking at the enterprise funds for Valley High specifically, when I'm looking at their financial report, they're operating in the red for this year. How would that impact Valley High and potentially like our budget going forward, or are they coming back for supplementals later in order to close that gap?
Yeah, so if this plan was approved, then yeah, that budget would be revised to include that additional cost, and it would just. So yes, they have been operating over the last 2 fiscal years at a loss, and that's obviously dipping into that fund balance or net position that they have. They would have to, again, once this is implemented, they would have to look at what the costs of like services that they provide would look like. I'm not sure, what that would look like right now, but we would work with Tom at Valley High.
Some of those new costs for assisting with IT and HR and those sorts of things can get passed on and factored into Medicaid and Medicare allocations, I believe.
Okay, so I guess my main question is like, if we're taking that out, but then it comes back to us
Some
that
of
they
it-
need that.
But you're on to a point, we, as Kevin said, we've lost money at Valley High the last couple of years. Several years in a row prior to that, we made money. That's how the fund got as big as it did, right?
Right.
We're trying to find that sweet spot where we are running just about break even year after year. That's part of what we're doing with the expansion of the whole memory care unit, But in the short term, this would probably accelerate loss in another year.
So, and I know that Dr. Jensen's not gonna like this, but if we took the 500 from the senior services grant, would that outcome be better for Valley High that's operating in the red?
Two are
at this moment?
completely separate.
So it's because it's the enterprise fund, is that?
Yeah,
well, it's its own separate levy. So Valley High can sustain, as that one slide showed, it has
23 months.
It has a whole bunch of money. So to take $500,000 from it, it may operate at a larger deficit next year. But overall, the whole objective is when the memory care unit is completed, that we get that back to zero. So taking $500,000 from 28 or whatever, the 23 that they had in reserves is really, to me, less detrimental than taking $500,000 from the senior services.
Okay, that's absolutely, thank you so much.
Dr. Jensen? Oh, wait a minute. Hold on a second. We're out of
23 months.
No. Somebody's got to turn one of theirs off for yours to come back on. We're limited to so many microphones on at one time.
Thank
Okay.
you. Oh, my God.
Dr. Jensen, I apologize.
Oh, good. I'm going to be brief because I know that we're running along here.
Those who just turned theirs off can turn them back on again.
I want to thank everyone for the financial modeling that you have presented to us in the different scenarios. I know that it's time-consuming but very insightful, so I want to thank everyone for your efforts. But getting back to the Senior Services Grant Commission at $1.6 million, my response to you is that, first of all, I want to thank you for finding another scenario that would leave the Senior Services Grant Commission levy untouched. And the reason I'm saying that is because we're seeing an increased number of older adults in our county, and that means increased demand for some of those services. And as you all know, that when we delay nursing home placement and people can stay in their homes longer, it's more cost effective. It's more cost effective for taxpayers. And the other thing is the Senior Services Grant Commission helps agency leverage other dollars through like the Area Agency on Aging which is now called Age Guide, and those dollars come in from that funding stream almost equal to 1.6 million. So we're looking at around $3.2 million combined with the two different funding streams that help people stay at home, whether it's home delivered meals, it is respite care, it is mental health services, technology. So I think it is a wise investment in keeping that levy intact for our older adults based on the changing demographics that we see in our county. So I want to thank you for doing that. And I would support the CPI scenario, and I want to, I think it's a budget that I think many people, especially when it was stated $14 on the average, it would impact individuals, right?
Yes.
So, I want to thank you very much for keeping the Senior Services Grant Commission levy intact. And the other thing is, I learned many years ago that these levies are interconnected. So once, am I understanding this correctly, Peter, that if we start decreasing one levy, it impacts another levy?
They're capped at the top, right? So if we decrease one, we create space for another. This year, we've been asked told by the state, we have to increase our veterans levy. That's coming at the expense of other levy space.
So getting back to the Valley High issue is that the bed mix is very important, and we did financial modeling at the Valley High Operating Committee. I think the memory care unit will help offset some of those financial issues, and also bed mix and capacity at Valley High. Am I right?
Agreed. And as we get our financials stabilized at Valley High over the next several years, we're going to continue to keep that fund balance strong.
Yes. Am I correct in my
Yes.
assumption?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take my comment back, Paula.
No, that's not, no, I think we need to be realistic about what's going on, especially with that memory care unit. It will be in demand, and I think we're on our timeline as far as bed mix and filling beds after COVID, and I think that number is going to change, right? No?
Which number?
She's saying that it would increase income after we have all the beds and the memory care facility available.
And it may, but that's 2-3 years out, so.
We're only taking the 500, but like you mentioned, there are plenty of reserves there. It won't impact in the long term if we would take from senior
You can
services.
see, there's a lot of 500,000s in 28 million.
Thank you. Mr. Kearns.
Okay, back to the slide on recommendations. Part of my thought was, a couple of them had brought it up about the MFT. It seemed like there was a lot of consensus on that to possibly increase it. I understand July is a problem that you wouldn't have it until July, but that's not an issue. And also, you guys have heard me ask this 100 times about the ARPA funds, different ARPA funds. So there's 15 million that we haven't committed of the 29.5 going to the public. My opinion is we can plug this hole real easily, and it's one time, like you're saying. Instead of the 1.5, you take 2.6, you take whatever we need to do to plug it. And at the same time, we bring forward possibly, maybe, 4 cents would be too much, I think, but you can go back at that apple and bite it again too later on if you need to. But you started with like a 2 cents on the MFT, and that is it's a user fee, of course. And there's, potentially $2 million a year at that point. Okay, so if you go to the 2.6 on on the ARPA funds, since you're gonna not institute that until July, the MFT, if you were to pass that. And that 2%, one of our problems in this county, you say 14, I hear this $14, and I say, BS. Because when you say $14, every single school district, every single police, fire department, they're gonna take that 5%. And I haven't heard any of them say they're not. They're gonna take that 5%. So if you say, let's make it easy for figuring, if it's a $10,000 tax bill, you're gonna see a $500 increase. That $14 doesn't mean diddly to you on that side. But if you don't start keep setting our example the way we have in the past of holding on the real estate taxes, and if you went with the MFT, a 2 cent on the MFT, that's a user tax on everyone who buys fuel in this county, including non-residents of this county. Now, I'll say when you talk about, well, then that would raise our prices in the county on our fuel. Generally, if you go into Wisconsin, diesel fuel, I buy diesel fuel for my truck. Diesel fuel was 15 to 30 cents a gallon lower all day long in Wisconsin when you get across the line. The other day, I drove to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I thought, I'm gonna fill up with fuel. The cheapest I found, Woodstock, Illinois, is 10 cents higher than the cheapest fuel in Wisconsin, okay? And how can that be? Because Woodstock has a motor fuel tax for their own streets on top of everyone else's, MFT, yet they're the cheapest fuel. So that 2 cents will not kill the business in this county for the fuel purchases. Yet it will generate $2 million to keep it off of our real estate taxes, which is what's pushing all of our residents out of this county and state. The real estate taxes. That's what's killing everybody. And so I think if we were to take that ARPA, that 15 million is going to a few, but I'm not saying take all the 15 million that's left, but take 2.6 to plug our hole so we don't hit the real estate taxes. I don't like the idea of hitting the real estate taxes. I'm okay with taking the new growth every year. I'm okay with that because it is the new growth. So I'll leave it at that, but that's my opinion. And as the Valley High Enterprise, that 500,000 on that, the only reason I would support that is because, like you say, there's chance to recover that through Medicare and other charges as an increased cost. So that I'm okay with because of that. I would agree on the senior grant, because I was on that commission the first time I was on the board. I think that does a lot of good with those funds. That hits a lot of people. And the seniors are really hurting on real estate taxes. And this would help. They may not be the ones driving as much.
Jim, the only comment that I'll make about your comments is with taking more ARPA funds is the problem with trying to find projects that qualify. These 2 projects qualified. I don't know that we have any other projects in the pipeline for next year budgeted that would qualify. So I'm happy to have us go back and look at that again, but it's not as easy as simply saying, let's just use more ARPA funds, because it has to be qualified in order to be able to use them.
I would think the Valley High Memory Care would fall right into that.
Well, but
It doesn't help the general fund.
that doesn't help the general fund, because that's,
So then you could take some more from Valley High
No.
on your other thing. But find some. I think you can find it.
all I'm saying is, I'm not saying I can't, I'm just saying we have to look. And I don't, as of right now, I don't know that there is anything. The only other caveat that I'll make about your statement is going to the long-term health of the county. Again, I understand no one wants to raise even the $14, and, my concern is that you, by setting us on that trend, whatever graph you want to look at, that sets us down a path that. Nope. That could be detrimental going forward. And so I'm willing to take what you're saying and relook at it again and cut through numbers. I mean, the reality is we're presenting this. We know that things are going to change in the next 2.5 months before we actually pass a budget. So the 1.1 that we're saying in CPI, that may not end up being 1.1. It may end up only being whatever, 700,000 or 800,000. To me, that's the one that will decrease. It's not going to go up. It'll decrease if depending on how things flush out for the next 2.5 months.
Okay, in response to that, the 2 cents MFT, long-term,
Is a great idea.
is
And I look forward to that being on your transportation committee and having that discussion. I mean, I don't, you know, again, to me, that is a revenue stream. That's a ongoing revenue stream that can fix that. So happy to have that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns. Ms. Parrish?
Thank you, Chairman, for an opportunity to ask a second question. Actually, Mike, you just answered one that I had about ARPA, so I appreciate that because it's my understanding that we have not yet allocated all of the county ARPA. I think there's still some question as to some of that being allocated. So I appreciate hearing that these 2 projects are the only projects that we can use to take ARPA. So thank you for that clarification. Kevin, if you could go back to the slide with the special funds, I think that's the slide my question's on.
Sorry,
Green, where like IMRF and Valley High.
Fund strength?
The fund balance, thank you.
slide what?
Thorson. Just a quick question. Could you remind me why we have 9.25 months of IMRF when the policy is 5?
Yeah, what's happened over the last 3-4 fiscal years for our county employer rate is that it's decreased a lot. So what am I missing?
Cheryl's celebrating behind you.
Got it. Okay. Yes, and it is a reason.
What
to
we
celebrate.
paid this year is like the lowest of my career.
Right.
I've been doing this a long time.
So, because of they have done really well with their investments, and so that has resulted in the county's employer rate being so low. At some point, I don't have that, but here, but at some point, IMRF actually borrowed funds to cover some of the employer, and we were able to pay some of that back, and I believe still some of that outstanding,
Still have to pay a little back.
right. So there's about 1.2 million out of these that has to be taken, but at this point, what has really helped is the employer rate being so low because of how well their investments have done.
Okay, and so I realize, don't anybody throw anything at me. This is probably an apples and orange question, but we can't use any of that money for anything else.
Well, no, that's not. So we're building it up because we have to pay back the general fund. So we borrowed $3 million from the general fund
Okay, so
because we were negative and we had to make our payments.
Okay.
And we paid part of it back already. We still got to pay the rest of it back. So the intent is that, and I don't know if we're still planning on doing it this year.
Not 2023, 2024.
2024. We're gonna take the rest of that out of that fund and give it to the general fund.
Okay, so that's already earmarked, so
Correct.
we can't take any more out of that 4.3
Well, no, we
to
can-
deal with the 2.6.
If our rates continue to be low, then we don't need to levy as much. But we just need to be understanding that we don't set those rates. The fund does, the state does. And so you really need to have some balance because that's how we got in trouble last time. And so you just need to make sure that you have enough in reserve so that when the rate does go back up again because their investments aren't doing as well and they do their calculation, some actuary says, well, no, this is what you owe. We got to make sure we have it.
Yeah, thank you. And
I haven't said it yet, but thank you all for your due diligence and your diving in deep, and I really appreciate it. So my questions are of curiosity and novice understanding of all of this, and so thank you for answering them. And again, thank you for all your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Mr. Vijik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions. The first one, and I realize that we shouldn't dwell into the spreadsheet, but when will we get the information related to the Division of Transportation? There's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions that are open. It has to be determined based on union contract.
We think that union contract will be resolved by the time we get to your next Division of Transportation meeting, Transportation Committee meeting. There is enough money in the highway fund to accommodate whatever we need to do here. And again, it's not going to impact what we're doing on the general fund.
Okay, so that was my first question. Second one is, given the determination of, again, it's an estimate of $14 increase per home property tax, do you have an estimate of how much it would be for businesses?
No, Mike, remember, we talked about that. I'm back of the napkin doing $14 on a $7,000 property tax bill.
Right.
You tell me if that's average or not, I don't know. A $7,000 property tax bill, it would amount to about $14. I don't know what a commercial property tax bill looks like. I don't own a business, so I can't answer that.
Okay, that's fine.
It's a lot higher.
It's got to be a lot higher. Well, I don't want to scare businesses away. Also, the idea, how much money do we generate from solar farms? Do we get any money from the solar farm programs?
Property tax.
That's it?
We don't have too much significant solar farms yet.
Well, yeah, but we get right now nothing, right? Or do we get something?
Besides property tax? No.
Okay, just another question. Mr. Kearns and I have a difference of opinion when it comes to the motor fuel tax. I think, as Dr. Jensen had pointed out in our last meeting, that the motor fuel tax would be regressive if we increased it. And so as such, then, my concern, I don't have a diesel vehicle. I have a regular gasoline vehicle and 87 octane. And I find a significant price difference between me going to Wisconsin and McHenry. And if we increase it, we'll have potentially more people going. The other counties that have a 4.044, they're not against Wisconsin, are they?
Lake is.
Okay, Lake. Beyond that, and Lake County is how much? They're 4.042. Okay, so given that being the case, we're going to go up and people are going to sit there and say, why don't I go to Wisconsin? Why don't I go just to Lake County? Lake County for me is about 10 minutes. So given that being the case, I'm afraid that we're going to lose potential income there. I agree with Dr. Jensen. I'm very happy that you have been able to figure out a budget where we would support senior services at the current rate. I will be against any cutting of senior services. Of any of the constituents in our community, I think senior services would be most hard hit by that. Last but not least, with the Valley High, we have a 23 months surplus, of which the $25 million in fund balance, I assume part of that's going to be for the memory care wing?
Yes.
Okay, so that would then be, I don't know, I'm not on that committee, but let's say $8 million for the wing approximately. That leaves a $17 million surplus. How much do we keep adding on to that before we
We aren't adding right now, Mike.
We're not adding anymore?
We lost money the last 2 years. And we're probably going to lose money this year. And then we will also spend, I think, $4 or $5 million for the memory care addition. So it won't be at 28 million.
Okay,
3 years
all
from
right. So we're losing how much every year approximately? 2 million, 3 million?
About 900,000.
900,000. So, so we may have approximately
Understanding that we lost money the last 2 years, largely because we can't staff it and because of COVID, right? The plan is never to lose money, and historically, we've not lost money. I think we will be able to right the ship over the next 24 months and get back to a stable situation.
Well, just let me clarify what I'm trying to say here. Take the 28 million, take $8 million out for the memory wing. We got 20 million. If we're losing $1 million each year, we got 20 years without any sort of problem. I'm just wondering if that number continues to grow, at what point do we do like we did last time when we did a rebate for Valley High? I mean, I can't see 23 months overage and then turn around and say to the taxpayers or any other groups that when we start looking at senior services or mental health, I know they're not an enterprise fund, but there's a point to where if somebody says you keep 6 months of surplus and AARP says you should keep 6 months approximately in reserves for emergencies, well, we're almost 4 times that amount for an enterprise. Well, I just think that doesn't seem to make logical sense to me. I yield back to the chair.
Well, the only comment that I'll make is we should really be keeping more than 5 months in Valley High. The reimbursement rate from the state and federal government is very
We can have
long.
an 8-month lag. We've always had it at minimum 12-month.
So I'm just saying, you know, I don't want people to think just because our policy says 5 months that really is appropriate in this particular case for Valley High, just because.
That's not accurate. So we made an error. What? Yeah, this is not a 5-month policy at Valley High. It's a 12-month policy.
Oh,
so
okay, well, that's.
Yeah.
I'm just reading what I
And I'm telling you we made an error. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay. Ms. Schofield.
Thanks. I'll be quick because I just wanted to point out as the CMAP representative that the MFT is not a long-term sustainable option because we've had for the last several years, I sat on a transportation funding working group, and the recommendation is actually the state legislator to change the way that the funding is done, and it will have to be in the future for the reasons that Kevin had mentioned before with the shift to electric vehicles as well as the reduced road miles that people are traveling. So it's just not a long-term solution, and I'm happy to have that discussion later, but it's one I wouldn't support because of that. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Schofield. Ms. Wegner.
Thank you. First of all, I want to apologize if I've been snarky. I should have had some more donuts.
Got a couple left.
Quick questions. I promise I'll be quick. Okay, the negative on the county highway fund, that's prior to the $3 million being put in there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And second of all, you were talking about the IMRF still has to pay back the general fund, right?
Correct.
Is that going to happen this year?
No, right now, at least what I'm planning to do is in 2024 come back and incorporate that in the budget for 2024. And the main reason for that is we need that cash flow. So as Mike said, we don't want to get back into that issue. So we need to rebuild that. And you know, I believe that this year we'll get to that point, and then we'll incorporate it into the 2024 budget.
Okay, so at some point that general fund balance will increase.
Well,
and we could use that as a buffer for a.
It's already accounted for in there, so we have it as a interfund receivable. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wegner. Any further questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen. Michael, final statements, closing arguments.
No, it's just, so again, just so that everyone understands, we're going to refine this numbers better for finance in a week. A resolution will come forward to finance with a budget that has these recommendations in it. That will then come to the full board for our October meeting. The board doesn't actually vote on anything. It just simply is put on review for 30 days. So it'll move to review. We will ultimately vote on a budget at the November full board meeting on November 17th, 18th, something like that, whatever it is. again, these numbers are going to continue to change just because as we get better data and better information, we will be updating all this. The information that board members have requested, we'll get that done and out to the board for the board members that wanted it. And I can't say enough how much I appreciate all the hard work that staff has done. It's every year it seems to be getting more and more challenging. So, Carrie wanted to show Questica real quick.
Oh, go right ahead.
That's why everyone was staying around.
Good call.
You got 30 seconds now.
Just as you're doing your own due diligence now on the budget, this is a tool that we want to make sure Carrie's going to share with you.
So in prior years, I don't know if you guys remember, you used to get like a packet on your desk that had like the total funds, revenue expense, general fund, revenue expense, and then all the breakdown. So instead of doing like the paper copies, we have a new tool that we started. We did the full budget this year within Questica. And one thing that we really liked about it was kind of this transparency, and this is available for everyone, the public, for you guys. So right now there's a couple different ways. It's a little bit hidden, I guess. So the 2022 budget, if you click on, well, yes. So so the interactive, or you can actually just Google like McHenry County Questica Open Book. It'll take you to the link. But once we get the recommendations uploaded into Questica, Greg is going to put it out like in the spotlight from the McHenry County homepage. Just really quick, I don't know if you guys have been out here, but this is the actual open book that's available to the public. So it's very similar to the worksheets that you used to have. We have the full budget, the general fund and all the special funds, revenue expense, and then just the general fund. And all the discussion today, we've been talking about balancing it. That's why they're not in balance, but they will be. So just for demonstration purposes, we'll look at the general fund expenditure because that's the easier one. So depending on how you like to look at information, I personally like to see the numbers. So you can look at summary, you can look at a bar graph. So this is color coded. So this is 23. This is year to date, last year's budget, and then 21. And so this is very high level. It's just general fund by category. So there's no additional drill down from this screen. This may be a better way to look at it if by percentage. Just it's good visualization to see, really how much personnel impacts the budget. But then if you really want to drill down, if you come to this department and then apply, we have, so this is just general fund by department. And then if you want to drill down to division within that department, and then to category, and then to main account. So this section can get as detailed as you want. Or you can always export it and look at it however you want. But yeah, it's this one right here.
This is available anyway. You can direct your constituents to this.
Yeah, and if you have any questions or comments or different layers that you want to look at, just send me an email or give me a call, and I get excited about it. But
Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn. Ms. Altoff, seconded by Ms. Wegner. All in favor?